it earlier, if you got it. If you would raise your hand, which is the, you can just click on that little button at the bottom that says reactions. It looks like a little happy face. There is a place for you to be able to raise your hand, and Beth and Laura will be monitoring to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to get a question answered. We have a full agenda today, lots of different aspects of advocacy that will be discussed to kind of begin to give everybody a background in what's involved, so that hopefully many of you will be comfortable in moving forward and being active in this area. We are very pleased, in addition to seeing some new faces, that we have so many returning people that have already been involved in this area. So at this point, I think, unless Beth, do you think we want everybody to take a minute to introduce themselves and just state which league they're with? Or do we want to just go ahead and move into the program? You're on mute.
Why don't we? I think that, are you okay with that, Tony and Andrea? This is kind of your show. Great.
Oh.
Okay, will you, Maud, go ahead. You're muted.
I was just going to say, we could introduce ourselves in the chat.
We can certainly do that if everybody would like to do. Why don't you, just to save some time this morning, because we do at this point have 28% participants, why don't you just type in your name and your league affiliation? And if you would like to include your contact information in case somebody would like to follow up with you at a later time. That's always a plus. That's a great idea, Mon. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Tony at this point.
Tony.
And
Okay.
Take it away.
And Beth is going to put up the slides.
Andrea, are you able to put up the slides? I'm afraid I don't have the most recent version.
Sure, I can do that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That does mean you're in charge of moving the slides forward. Sorry.
Oh, it's no problem. Tony, if you can, if I don't advance at the right time, if you could just give me a prompt, that
Sure.
would be great. Okay, I'm gonna put this in presentation mode, and if you can all let me know if you're seeing it that way in presentation mode. Does this look correct to everybody?
Yes, it does.
Perfect. All right, Tony, take it away.
Okay. So we are doing something a little bit different this year than previously. We are doing different levels of lobbying, advocacy, and we're progressing to the very basics, which is today, and then moving up with more complexity as we go along. Now, so we have 4 parts, and there is a little glitch that's going on. We are exploring another platform for keeping track of bills, and that's not anything that's really definitive yet, but just in case, please keep track of the next presentation, because we're not sure if it can be done on January 7th, which is what our plan is at the moment. And that one is pretty much strictly how to function within the Legislative Action Committee. So it's a little bit different than the other 3. Okay, moving on to the agenda for today. So we are going to talk a bit about social justice and what is public policy, advocacy and lobbying, dealing with a bill, culture, and communicating and testifying. And I do know that some of you have been around for a very long time, and some of this is going to be redundant, but we're happy you're here, and you may have some insights that you would like to share with people. Okay. This is as I was mentioning before, it's a 4-part training series. It's designed to increase the skills of people wishing to engage in advocacy and lobbying. So during these 4 different presentations, we will be covering democracy and social justice, advocacy and lobbying, culture, skills, and some advanced topics on persuasion, social marketing, policy analysis, and tactical planning. So we're hoping to give a comprehensive view of what is going on, what happens with the legislature, so forth and so on. So some of the basic functions, advocacy and government relations, are essential for many organizations. And I think we need to think beyond just the topic that we generally work on, which whether it's housing or health or gun or whatever it is, higher education, that we need to think about it in a bigger context. So it's advocacy, and I lecture people, they probably feel that way, that it's a basic function for almost all, especially nonprofit organizations, but many other kinds of organizations as well. So it's a way to keep track of what is happening, what could affect an organization, what could affect a particular area of interest, depending upon the mission of the organization. So using the government relations and going even beyond the legislature, the lobbying and advocacy provide additional resources that could be grants, or it could be helpful information, whatever. It also helps with establishing some partnerships with the government so that it is easier when the time comes to go ahead and work with people in government. The League, as an example, this year, or most recently, has been working with the Secretary of State's office on a couple of items. We've been checking with them on 17-year-olds getting the vote back again, and excuse me, and also doing some things, one major thing with redistricting. So we work with them. They are interested in what we think. It's a back and forth kind of situation, and it's very helpful, and it's kind of fun to be involved in some of the basic things. And again, this year too, the governor asked us to come and talk to him about 2 pieces of legislation he was particularly interested in our point of view. So getting out there, advocating for your organization, advocating for your topic, whatever it is really very important and can highlight who we are as an organization and that we are really a go-to organization. Okay, next. So basically for the League of Women Voters and for others, we are advocating for social justice, and we're trying to promote social change, broadly speaking. I mean, I'll go back to the fact that we're trying to reinstate 17-year-olds being able to vote. It's a social justice issue. Is this not important for 17-year-olds to start getting involved in the situation of voting and ballots? And they're going to be 18 by the time the general election comes along. Shouldn't they be stimulating and the actions that are going to be on the November ballot? We're working to remove the root causes of social injustice. We've been working with air quality in low-income neighborhoods. As an example, of course, we've been paying attention to the health and how it is affecting low-income people. So these kinds of items are within the social justice framework. And also education. Are we providing education equally? How are we taking care of that? What do we need to do to get that done? So also personal and social engagement. It's a collective actions of a group of people who come together. It's a working as a community and not disparate kinds of topics that people run across or they work on. It's working together and providing more opportunities and more help. So providing the basics for those that have little, justice, equality, diversity, inclusion. As you probably all know, these are something that the League has adopted as priorities. We're calling it JEDI now instead of DEI. So that's advocating is a larger concept than lobbying. And it's something that happens and you go on with it all the time. Next. And here's my favorite little quote. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. This is from Dr. Seuss's Lorax. And I'm a fan of Dr. Seuss, even though there's some controversy about some of his books. And this is my favorite environmental book. So next. So public policy definition and themes. We're talking in the League, we talk about government policy, public policy. That's what we focus on. We don't focus on the policies of specific organizations or those kinds of things, unless you want to include the fact that, you know, the missions of housing and education and all the items that we participate in. So the public sector and public officials, we talk to government officials, we talk about public problems, and we talk about goals and means of achieving those goals. So public policy and public definition is the allocation of scarce resources according to a set of values. Who gets what, when, and how. And the legislature sets up, in a way, their own definition of those kinds of things, and I will touch on that before too much longer. And then, so advocacy is a broader concept than lobbying. It's more than attempting to influence legislation. It's education as well as lobbying, and it's marketing the organization. And it's marketing the concepts of the organization in general. Next. So more specifically, if you use the IRS definitions, advocacy, general information supporting an organization and the general positions of an organization. So again, it's a more general concept. It's what we do pretty much all the time. Lobbying is the transmitting of a point of view, a position on a specific piece of legislation to elected officials or their staffs. And it's also urging the public to contact legislators about specific pieces of legislation. Again, we'll talk in more depth about these two concepts, particularly lobbying. So there are two basic kinds of lobbying, and this sort of trips up people a bit. So there's direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying. So direct lobbying is any attempt to influence legislation through communication with any member, employee, or legislative body. So if you were talking to a staff person of a senator in Colorado, and you are asking the staff person that, or to tell the legislator that you want a particular piece of legislation passed, you are lobbying in that case as well, because that message is going pretty directly to the legislator. With any other government officials who may participate in the formulation of legislation. So the fact that we're talking to the Secretary of State's office, and we're trying to get something done there with the 17-year-olds particularly, that is lobbying as well. So grassroots lobbying is any attempt to influence legislation through an attempt to affect the opinion of the general public or any segment thereof. Billboards are an example. If you have a newsletter that goes to more than your membership and a higher percentage than your membership, that can be considered grassroots lobbying. And I say, grassroots lobbying is reaching beyond your members, beyond your organization, in an attempt to stir up some kind of reaction on the part of the general public. Okay, so the types of lobbying that we have up there is for a sector, which would be like housing and education and gun control, all those kinds of things. So a specific topic. It's also for the protection of the infrastructure of organizations. We've had several pieces of legislation introduced on charitable contributions. Also, we've had, of course, have lots of them on employee benefits, employee rights. All those kinds of things affect the way that we do business. Now, in the League, we don't necessarily take those topics on, but we are members of the Colorado Nonprofit Association, and that's one of their main items that they pay attention to is the infrastructure and how they might affect the nonprofits. And for the mission or cause of an organization, and again, that goes back to the organization itself has a cause, and it has a direction in which it wants to go. And so it's the general overall view of what the organization is. And two types, main types, we have reactive and proactive. And reactive, as it says, is that pieces of legislation are introduced and we look at them and we say, okay, we're going to take a position on that one, or we're not going to. Proactive is writing our own legislation, and we are attempting to be more proactive. And the issues this year, if I can remember quickly, is there the 17-year-old vote, the things with redistricting that we're trying to develop some legislation around. Andrea, do you remember a couple of the other ones?
I think those are our key areas that we've been talking about with the Secretary of State's office. We've had conversations about some other priorities too, like prepaid postage on ballots, that sort of thing, but that's been a little less specific. We have a little more traction around the other two areas. So I would say the data collection in relation to redistricting and 17-year-old voting rights have really been kind of the key focus of our interim activity this session, or this interim session.
Yes, and we're also doing some work on cybersecurity. And Maud is heading up that group. So we're getting along on that topic, and it's obviously very, very complicated. And we also are working with Oregon on the topic. Political activities is participation in campaign of an individual for public office. Our kind of organization does not participate in campaigns. So just stay away from the people. Stay away from them, those who are running from office. Very important. I'm getting lots of trouble for that. So Irs definition of lobbying, an organization is regarded as attempting to influence legislation if it contacts or urges the public to contact members of a legislative body for the purpose of proposing, supporting, or opposing legislation. Advocates for the adoption or rejection of legislation. Lobbying is only the expenditure of money by the organization, which this gives us a lot of leeway, actually. So we have a lot of volunteers who obviously are down at the legislature working on different topics. And very little money is spent. There's no money for the volunteers unless it's reimbursement, and then that doesn't count. And we do have to pay for, putting together materials and best time if she's doing some of the work on the bill or legislation. But other than that, we don't spend, well, we do pay for Andrea, but she's not terribly expensive either. So we do spend some money, but we don't spend like the contract lobbyists or some of those other people. So in the first sentence, the contract contacts or urges the public to contact. So if we do the contacting again, that's direct lobbying. If we urge the public to contact, that is grassroots lobbying. And the IRS rules are more lenient for direct lobbying than for grassroots lobbying. No substantial part of activities of a charitable organization may constitute carrying on propaganda or otherwise attempting to influence legislation. So we have lots of 501c4 organizations. There are no limits for them. And for the 501c3, it's not substantial. And this is kind of interesting. There have been 3 court decisions about what substantial is or is not. And one of them is, if you're a big organization, you have a lot of influence, then substantial isn't necessarily a very big part of your budget. So it was very, very loosey-goosey. And now we have what is called the H election, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, Beth, this is you. I'm sorry, Andrea, this is you.
Thanks, Tony. Okay, we're gonna get into kind of a little, the sort of the technical side of things, and how we actually get a bill going, how we read the bill once it's been drafted, that sort of thing. To start, ideas for a bill can come, and often do come, from organizations such as us, from members of the public. Anyone can suggest an idea for a bill to a legislator. And then, of course, legislators oftentimes will have their own ideas for bills too. But it's public opinion and public input plays a really important role in the legislation that can get developed, in letting legislators know, what issues are important for their constituents and in their district. So that communication actually is really powerful. And it's something that we shouldn't underestimate. Many bills do come about because, interested grassroots organizations such as ourselves or interested individuals with, specific experience around an issue or specific knowledge, insights, approach a legislator and let them know that, this is something that really needs a legislative solution. So that is a powerful tool that we have that, we just really should be mindful about. As I mentioned, we do have some interim activity that's underway. Part of our approach is to, identify sponsors, get other stakeholders involved, try and, get together a coalition. And that's something that can really take a long time. So it is important to start early on that. I think when you're acting in coalition, it really is about multiple conversations, trying to figure out where your allies are on an issue. So, ultimately we can speak louder with our collective voices than any individual or legislator or individual could on their own. So, getting that coalition in place is important, and it's important to start that process early because it is a time-consuming thing. So once you have been through that process and, you've got legislative interest in a bill and a sponsor, the bill can be drafted up. It's important to kind of have a sense of the different pieces of it. So as you're reading it, you have a solid understanding of, what all these technical details that are, on the cover of the bill include, because it kind of helps us inform, our knowledge about, what we're seeing here. So there are several pieces of information that are included in the title and the text of the bill that we do want to touch on. I know that's, maybe all of this will be somewhat familiar to some of you. I know we have some very experienced LAC members that are joining us today, but for those who may not be quite as familiar with legislation, we do want to make sure that we're kind of establishing a baseline about the different pieces of the bill and make sure that we're approaching this with the same understanding. Every bill will identify the specific session of the General Assembly in which the bill is being taken up. The 2022 session will be the second session of the 73rd General Assembly, obviously for the state of Colorado. You'll see all of that indicated at the top on the title page. And the 2022 session will begin on January 12th. A single General Assembly sits for 2 regular sessions, allowing the same 100 elected officials to be in office for a 2-year working period, which is the reason that you will see reference to both a first and second regular session. You'll note as you get on the General Assembly website that for the next upcoming session, it will indicate the second session of the 73rd General Assembly. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarification there, because just on the surface, that might seem a little bit confusing. Then if the bill is introduced during a special session, that'll be indicated in the bill number as well, which is something that we've had to deal with lately because there have been some special session activity. You'll also notice information on the top of the bill that indicates which version of the bill is being viewed. The terms that you'll hear here are introduced, engrossed, re-engrossed, revised, and re-revised. And this pertains to the amendments that have been incorporated into the bill by either the House or the Senate. And I think in a couple of slides, we do have some information on those definitions that you'll be able to refer back to. So we'll get to that a little bit more in just a second here. The top of the bill will also indicate information on the Office of Legislative Legal Service internal tracking numbers. You'll see an OLS number on the top of the bill. And you'll also see the name and contact information for the bill drafter, which, sometimes you do want to reach out with clarifications or questions. So it's important to understand what that is. And then the bill number itself will indicate the chamber in which it was introduced. It will indicate the session year and then the bill number. So a bill this coming session that is introduced in the House, we'll see it referred to as HB 2022, I almost said 21, 22 dash, and then whatever the bill number is. So that just kind of gives you an indication of, as you look at archived legislation in some instances, it can kind of be helpful to keep that straight. And it's especially useful in searching too, because if you're doing it by just the straight number without reference to the year, that can cause some issues. Okay, so more on the parts of the bill. The next section of the title page that you'll see, a little further down from the bill number and the title will be the name of the House and Senate sponsors. And you'll see the prime sponsors names listed in bold. So that will kind of give you, information on who is backing the bill and who your points of contact would be should you, have specific questions or, want to communicate about the content of the bill. The third section of the bill lists the House and Senate committees to which the bill has been assigned. The hearings that will take place as the bill moves through the legislative process, those committees that are listed are the relevant committees that you want to pay attention to for scheduling purposes. So, if you want to listen in and, follow the progress of the bill through the committee or provide testimony, you'll refer to those committees of reference that are listed on the bill. The bill may be assigned to more than one committee in each chamber, including assignment to the Appropriations or the Finance committees. There sometimes is some confusion about the difference between the Finance Committee and the Appropriations Committee. Since they both deal with fiscal aspects of the bill, they can seem, really similar. So to clarify jurisdictional differences of the committees just a little bit, the Finance Committee generally considers matters related to legislation that affects the state revenue and tax structure. And this committee also has legislative oversight responsibilities for the Public Employees Retirement Association, the Department of Revenue, State Treasury, and the Office of State Planning and Budgeting. The Appropriations Committee considers bills that change expenditures or revenue and affects the state budget. Many of the bills that are considered by the Appropriations Committee have had hearings in other committees before they've come to Appropriations. So if that has happened, the Appropriations Committee doesn't typically take public testimony on that. So something to note there as well. Let's see. So further down on the bill title page, you will see reference to the title and a bill summary that will be underneath that. It is important to note that the summary pertains to the bill as introduced, and it may not reflect amendments that have been approved in committee along the way. So it's really important that you are looking for, actual noted amendments that may have been incorporated in the bill, because the summary doesn't always capture that. The bill summaries will be updated after passing third reading in the House of Introduction. So it will eventually get an update, but you just have to kind of be careful about that and not rely too much just on the straight summary, because there may be important changes that have occurred along the way. It is important to note that amendments are going to get captured in a specific way, and there's a difference between amendments made by the House and those made by the Senate. Any shaded text that you see will reflect the amendments that have been made by the House, and text that is double underlined are indicating Senate amendments. And you don't necessarily have to commit that to memory or anything. There is a key that references this at the bottom of the bill, so there's a bit of a reminder there, but just note that that's an easy way to kind of spot what some of those amendments that have been incorporated actually are. All right, and I mentioned earlier that we would get to a slide that gives a little bit more definition about the different versions of the bill. I won't read through all of this specifically, but you'll have this here as a reference. It's just kind of giving you a little bit more information about the different versions of the bill as it moves through the legislative process. I do want to say a little bit about the safety clause that you see referenced at the bottom of the slide here. This is a clause that can be included in a bill that will allow it to take effect immediately without a challenge from the public. The General Assembly has exclusive power to determine when to include a safety clause in a bill. And legislation that doesn't include the safety clause can be referred to the ballot, asking voters to either approve or reject a law passed by the General Assembly. So that's something that's important to know as well. It doesn't always, that referendum clause, that is a power that's derived from the Colorado Constitution. It allows people to challenge all or a portion of an act. It doesn't typically come into play, but we have seen that in recent years. The most notable one that comes to my mind is around the National Popular Vote Compact. So something to note there that can come into play and lead to activity that we really want to stay engaged in for legislation that we care a lot about. And then the last thing I want to say about the parts of a bill before I turn back to Tony, really technical in nature, just kind of getting at the different statutory references that you will see incorporated in legislation. The numbers that you see here are an example of the way you will see the Colorado Revised Statutes listed. The Colorado Revised Statutes are divided into 44 titles, and that's indicated, the title is indicated in that first number that you see there. And titles broadly describe the subject matter that's contained in that portion of the statute. Each title is then subdivided into smaller units that include articles and sections, and you'll see that indicated on the slide here as well. And this is just important to note because kind of understanding the reference that you're seeing will help you refer to the specific sections of the statute that is either being added to by the legislation or revised by the bill. So you can really kind of hone in on the piece that you're looking for. So I think that is all in terms of the technical aspects of the bill as far as reading the bill. And I will turn it back to Tony.
Okay. So just a quick review. There's the first reading in the first chamber for the bill. It's introduced and assigned to a committee, and that's all that happens. Then it's sent off to the committee and it's heard in the committee. This is the time when public comment is taken. They have testimony on pieces of legislation. The second reading is debated on the floor. And as Andrea said, it's heard in committee, but it may be several committees, not necessarily just one. So the second reading is actual debate on the floor. And there is a voice vote, which if you're listening, you may find out that, if the chair, the person who's in the chair at the moment wants the bill to pass, they will go ahead and say that the bill has passed on to the next step, even though it doesn't necessarily seem that was the vote. So this is a very informal, is probably not quite the right word, but it's a vote that's not recorded. Then we go to the third reading, which in general is most people legislators want that to be pretty much the same as it came from second reading. Sometimes there will be amendments, and usually, often, legislators will boo the legislator who has offered the amendment. But it's perfectly legitimate. They just think that they've taken care of everything at second reading. On third reading is the recorded vote. Next. So after a bill passes the first house, it is sent to the second chamber where it follows pretty much the same same, excuse me, same procedure. If the second chamber passes a different version of the bill, then it goes to the first chamber for concurrence. If the second chamber does not concur, or the chamber to which it has been sent back to, then a conference committee is appointed, and the bill that passes the conference committee goes back to both chambers. After passage by both chambers, the bill goes to the governor, who can sign it, veto it, or take no action. It becomes a bill without action of the governor. One thing that I find very interesting, because once upon a time we used this, is that the governor has to send a veto to the Secretary of State along with a veto message. And one bill way back didn't have the veto message attached to it, so that the bill was considered that it had passed. So it's good to pay attention to everything along the way, because you just never know when your opportunities are going to be there. So then it becomes an act, and it's placed in Colorado revised statutes. So the veto is the vote, the expression of a collective judgment of the House or the Senate. A voice vote, as I've mentioned, generally on the second reading, it's taken orally. A voice vote will be used for adoption or amendments, and some other matters. A roll call can be obtained even on these if 5 members by a show of hands demand a recorded vote. And then the recorded vote is the last vote, generally on third reading, and the bill goes to the governor. So the bill, if it has been vetoed, can go back to the legislature for an override. And I think you've probably heard of some of that happening. It doesn't happen too much in Colorado, but this is just an explanation of the voting and the veto and the message, and what the governor does or doesn't do with the legislature. If the governor doesn't sign the legislation, then it's the bill passes. Public comments are important in many cases for a variety of reasons. Often the public display, it's generally for media coverage in some way or another, but it puts your organization out there in lights a little bit more. If you testify, and especially if you have a phrase that you use that is catchy, the media is likely to pick up on that. Excuse me. It also places your comments on the record, so it will be in the permanent record of the state legislature if anybody in the future wants to know what you said. Excuse me. You can plant questions with legislators, especially those that are thinking the same way that you are thinking about a bill, and you want a question asked that might not come up in your testimony. It's a good way to get some more information out there. Generally speaking, the legislators, the committees limit the testimony to 3 minutes, and sometimes you can't always get everything in you want to say. And sometimes public comments can change a legislator's mind, and then they will change the way they vote, hopefully in the direction you want them to. Beth or Andrea, do you want to take this fiscal notes thing?
Sure. The fiscal note is a really important source of information. It's essentially going to provide the information as to, you know, like what the, you know, action that, you know, is being taken through the bill, whether it's establishing a program or, you know, providing, you know, some sort of support, whatever the case may be. It's an assessment of how much it's going to cost. So there's information kind of about the scope and how they determined the cost of that. Legislative Council analysts, you know, will kind of specify how they've arrived at their estimate as to how much a bill will cost. So, you know, it's important because, you know, we've got a complicated tax structure and revenue generating structure in Colorado. So, you know, cost is always a concern. And so when you're looking to, you know, figure out kind of the ins and outs of a particular bill, you know, looking at that fiscal assessment can be really helpful. And it's also something that I know some of our longtime legislative action committee members will probably know that for whatever reason, the bill summary and some of the description of the bill that you see in the fiscal notes oftentimes is in much more straightforward, plain English than what you see in the bill. And so if you're ever having trouble really kind of getting at, you know, what exactly is this bill doing? Sometimes that can be sort of a difficult thing to assess. The fiscal note can be a fantastic resource in cutting through some of that legalese and some of the, you know, language that you see in the bill text itself, and just getting to a much more straightforward explanation about what's actually happening. So, you know, that can be a really important resource. You know, like I said, there's assumptions built into the process. You know, cost is an estimate, but they will kind of go through, you know, what those assumptions are and how they arrived at the scope and the cost. They'll give specific information on the impacts to state revenue and state expenditures. And the fiscal note will also include a statement about, you know, whether or not this is going to have any kind of TABOR impact. The other thing to note about the fiscal notes is that the Legislative Council staff person that is making the analysis and actually wrote up the fiscal note is included, similar to, you know, what I mentioned about the bill drafter being included on the bill text. There is contact information on the fiscal note as well, which can be really helpful if you do want to reach out with questions, or you know, you just need input on something that's in there, clarification. You know, that will direct you to the right person that's, you know, is really knowledgeable about that. So really great resource, really important component to, you know, analyzing a bill, and something that we definitely want to take into consideration as we're looking through a bill that we think impacts us. The fiscal note will really kind of round out that picture, and it is something that we frequently discuss in LAC meetings. I will note, again, I know longtime LAC members are very familiar with this situation. Fiscal notes do not always appear at the same time the bill appears. So there are many times when you have the text of a bill, and we might actually kind of hold a little bit in taking a position until we have additional information that sheds light on the situation via the fiscal note. And you'll see those appear on the General Assembly website, but I do want to note that it doesn't always happen at the same time, and sometimes you're waiting a week or so before that fiscal note is actually available. So it's just one of those things you kind of have to check for. And then, next slide. Tony, do you want to shift back on this one?
Sure. Let me say a couple of other things with the Appropriations Committee and the fiscal notes. Some bills are sent directly to the Appropriations Committee, and when they are, then they are considered the committee of reference, and there is testimony when that happens. So, and some bills for the fiscal impact and their relevance to the appropriation some of those bills are held until the budget has been determined, because they want to know how the appropriation will fit into the budget itself and how it will affect the budget. So it's very important, the fiscal notes, and actually very interesting. I mean, as Andrea said, the summary does seem to be a lot easier to read than what's in the bill. So some pointers. There are some other pieces of other materials that would be helpful. The status sheet, which tells you day to day to day to day where a bill is, where it's going. And this is something that generally you look at every day. And we'll get further into that at another time. And then there are the journals. The journals are a lot like the minutes of a meeting. The calendars, which is the agenda of the meetings. And then there are directories for the legislators. Also, you need to pay attention to bill deadlines. There are deadlines for when bills can be introduced, when they have to be heard, and how they have to get out of one house and go to the other house. Now, these deadlines are not always adhered to. So again, you have to pay attention to what they're doing. There's often some behind the scenes negotiations going on, and the bill might get held up. There are also bills that are introduced like a week before the end of the session, which makes it very difficult. And obviously they've missed the deadlines of introduction of bills. You've seen all the steps that the bills go through, and it's good to work with other lobbyists. It helps, more people involved, the more power you have. And you should not forget the governor's lobbyist, and be available, which is a little tricky sometimes when you're talking about online. But as you can be, you should be available. This is how a bill really becomes a law. So it is introduced in a committee. The committee amends the bill, and it has it's changed, and then it is amended on the floor on second reading, and it changes it also, and that it's enacted, and as funded by the Joint Budget Committee. There's no funding, so this is just a little bit of a cartoon to tell you that you can't always rely on the techniques or the steps that are the way a bill is supposed to be followed. Okay. So there are other tools to accomplish goals, litigation, rules and regulations. So when your bill has been passed, that's not the end of the work. There's also other steps that can or may need to be taken. Rules and regulations are particularly important, especially if they've been designated in the piece of legislation. So you need to follow that too, to make sure that the rules and regs are, they accomplish what, or they will accomplish what you think the bill is saying. I want to talk a little bit about culture. The culture of an entity has many different pieces to it. And I'm not going to read all this. When you get a copy of this presentation and you want to see what this says, you can look at that. But I think we probably all generally know what we mean by culture. but we don't often think about it. So there is a culture at the legislature which is different than the culture that we live with out here in the world. And there are a lot of different things that happen. So next slide. So the political culture, and again, I'm not going to read all these things, but there are a lot of things that are different than the way that we generally function. And if you go to the next slide, there's a list of the culture in general and the legislature. So we'll touch on this just a little bit. The culture in general makes decisions in a different way. And the legislature has been described as muddling through. The culture in general is rational. Legislature is more incremental. If you've ever written a report and tried to work with the legislature on the results of that, you will find that generally the report is very complex, or it could be very complex. And legislators, because of their time factor and all the people that they're working with, tend to try to make it as simple as possible. No, not always achieving that. So again, you can look at these different pointers and think about how the culture of the legislature is different than what we generally deal with day to day. Okay. Communications and presentations. Okay, understand the process and culture. We've touched on that a little bit. It's something that you need to be aware of. You need to be aware that something is different is going on in the legislature. We often tease about the legislature. Part of that, or if not all of it, is based on the fact that they are doing things differently because they have a different culture than what we generally experience outside the legislature. We need to be very respectful of decorum and legislative protocols. There are certain ways that the legislature functions, and we need to know what those are. We follow the general rules of good etiquette and communications, and we need to understand the receiver of a message. Communication is based on that understanding. So to testify, you need to sign up. It's a good idea to coordinate with others. The legislators don't particularly like somebody saying the same thing that somebody else did. You can always say, I agree with so-and-so about what they said, and then go on and say something that's different. You have to wait for permission to speak. And this is where people get a little bit hung up. It's just feels natural that if somebody asks you a question, you are going to answer it, but you actually have to wait for the chair of the committee to allow you to speak, and also to recognize you at the very beginning. And identify yourself and your organization, address the chair and committee. And if you do get questions and you don't know the answer, you can say, I don't know. The best thing to do is to offer to get information after the meeting and get it to the legislators. And Beth, you want to do this one? Beth, I'm sorry, Andrea.
Oh, no problem. Yes, I'll just say a few words about remote testimony and participating online. One of the silver linings that I would say came out of the pandemic is the expansion of opportunity for people all across the state to listen in or participate in a remote way. as many I think probably know, prior to 2020, there were dedicated remote testimony sites throughout the state. The intent there was to bring in input and allow public participation from various parts of Colorado that are just far removed from the capital. It's difficult for people to make that trek to actually appear in person. And so the remote testimony sites were intended to, allow for broader public participation and ensure input from all regions of the state, which is extremely important, but it was still pretty limited. And then when everything shut down and really the only feasible way of doing business during the pandemic was in a remote capacity, we saw, a complete reworking of, the ability to, tune into committees or provide testimony online. It's now available to anybody that, can access the internet and sign up to testify remotely. So we strongly encourage you to do this. There's still opportunities to participate in person, assuming, things don't, get much worse and we end up in a shutdown situation again. But, if it's not feasible for you to travel to the Capitol to participate in person, or, given the current situation that we're in with rising COVID cases and that sort of thing, you're just not comfortable doing this, remote testimony is a great way to join in. And, there's different things that you can do to the platform, through the General Assembly website. You can listen to committee hearings. You don't have to provide testimony if you just want to track the activity and, hear the deliberations there. You can tune in and listen to them. You can submit written testimony, or you can provide live testimony in a remote capacity. So you'll see here on the slide that there is a link that you'll need to access to sign up. And, it essentially kind of walks you through what you need to do. You will need to indicate whether you're opting to listen, submit written testimony, or if you want to provide live testimony. And then once you've done that, you'll see other options come up that, kind of will take you through the process of signing up. You'll have to provide your name and contact information and that sort of thing. It's one of those things that is not complicated, but it's a little bit difficult to describe without actually signing up for it. So I would encourage you all to take a look at the link, kind of get familiar with, where you go to do this. So if and when the time comes for you to sign up for this, you'll have some insight into kind of what that looks like and, how you get into the platform there. And then, of course, if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to provide support or walk people through, but it is pretty intuitive once you do get on that web page. And it's just been, I think, a really great expansion of resources. I think it's broadened public participation statewide in a way that we just didn't see prior to the pandemic. So I would definitely classify it as a silver lining that I hope is just, the way of doing business from here on out. So I think that's all I've got on that. But again, as you work through the process, or as it becomes necessary for you to sign up, just get in touch at any time if you need any help actually getting registered for that. And Tony, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the fact sheet. People often wonder how much they should be giving legislators, what they should be giving legislators. It is best, in the common knowledge is that 1-page fact sheets are the best. You should have a brief summary of the issue, state the problem and your position. Do not use a lot of numbers, and find a workable solution. It's good to come up with a solution if you can, and the benefit of that solution gives them something to work with. To come up and make compelling arguments, and you can always add attachments as necessary. And you really should distribute your testimony to all the committee members. And also the one sheet is valuable if you happen to run into a legislator and you want them to know what your position is about a particular bill, you could also just send it to them to let them know that this, and particularly if somebody's not in a committee, but you know a legislator pretty well, and it's a good idea to be able to just send out your one pager. It puts something in front of them. They have something to remember the issue by. They have file folders that they drop things into. So it could be hard copies or it can be electronically sent to them. So it's a good thing. Make it brief. Just don't overwhelm them. They have lots of things to read, and this is just one of them. So when you're writing your testimony or the fact sheet, you need to provide information and insights. You need to use, now we're more and more, people are thinking about storytelling, and that telling a story is a much better way of getting people's attention. So if you have a story to tell about the piece of legislation that you're working on, you know, do it and use vivid language, paint pictures, and make some kind of an emotional connection with the legislator or with the committee. And these 4 items, again, are being emphasized more for testimony, for trying to get people's attention. National is of the League of Women Voters US has put together some training on this issue of telling stories. So it's important, and it seems to be working better than just sitting in front of the legislator saying, I think you should pass this bill. That's an oversimplification, but so this is just, I'm not going to go through this one either. It's a listing of all the things that you need to pay attention to when you are putting your materials together, other than the ones that we've just talked about. Also, when you're testifying, you need to be very patient and very persistent also, but you need to listen very much to the point of view of the people who are, other people who are testifying and the legislators themselves. There might be something there that would be useful that you might be able to work together on a particular issue or a particular solution to a problem, so that you have a positive result from your testimony. I did mention earlier some other reasons why you do presentations, and we send out materials, and those are good points too. Okay, it's good to know your legislators, and one of the suggestions is that you put together a drop file. So meaning that you drop everything that you get or see on the particular person into your drop file, so that when you need to contact the person, you can relate to them. You might find out what's important to them, like Little League Baseball or something along those lines. And if you're having a conversation, you can use that. Or if you were working on a piece of legislation that is relevant to Little League Baseball, you can bring that up and you can talk about it and talk about your experience, paint the picture, tell the story. The other thing is that you can invite, in certain circumstances, I'm not sure that we could invite people to the legislative office just to tour it, because that's probably not what we're talking about. If you work with children or if you work on housing issues, there may be places to go to show people what your organization does or your topic. So you can have them speak at events. You need to be careful about the legislator restrictions for having people come to your organization and what you can pay for them. But doesn't say you can't do it. You have regular contact with them, wear your name tag so that they know who they're talking to and what organization you're with, and add them to your mailing list. So there are ways where you try to get more information about a legislator, especially the ones in your area, and that will help you. And once you get to know them, it's easier to talk to them than otherwise. And then also make sure that they understand your organization. And that's the end of part 1. I do want to say that we have put some things in on the state website that are related to this talk, and we're still updating that a little bit, but there are lots of pieces of paper in there that are what you have just been hearing, and then also you will get all the slides. So there should be plenty of materials for you to use. So I think that's it. Andrea, you want to say something?
No, I think that is all for part 1. As Tony mentioned at the outset, we do have this envisioned as sort of a series of training sessions that, will have a focus each time. So certainly more information to come. And our intention for the next training is to really focus more on kind of the nuts and bolts of being an LAC member, which hopefully will serve as a good refresher for those who have participated for a long time, and good introductory information for those that are newer to the group. Tony had mentioned there may be some change needed in the date, but we will definitely keep you all posted and look forward to you joining us for that.
I'd like to make sure everyone has had their questions answered. I know that Maud and Margie had questions, and I want to be sure those are answered.
And Kathy just asked one about where she could find the document.
Great. Tony, can you answer that for her?
Yeah, you go to the State League website, you sign in as a member, and then you go to the documents, go to member again, and then scroll down to documents, and that will take you to the area where you can find all these advocacy documents.
Yes, the file is called Advocacy Resources. Okay. And there is specifically an LAC toolkit in there. Because you must sign in, I can't send you a direct link to that folder, but when we send follow-up information here, a link to the recording of this video, the chat will send the resources a link to resources that Tony talked about that National has created on storytelling, as well as how to access this LAC toolkit. Kathy. Kathy Smith, did you have a question?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were talking about the other Kathy's question.
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with the remote testimony. I know this is for COVID, but I'm hoping that the legislature is going to adopt this permanently, the ability for folks to do remote testimony. In talking to a couple of legislators, I'm not sure that that's really being planned, and I was hoping perhaps the league could advocate for that. and also for them to do kind of a better job of figuring out availability for interpretation. So wanted to throw that out there to see what you thought.
Kathy, that's a great point about interpretation. That is not something that we have specifically raised with them in the past. So we can certainly do that. We have communicated with leadership last session to really urge, the ongoing adoption of expanded remote testimony to make sure that people throughout the state can easily access and participate. And we can certainly do that again. I have not been able to get a completely straight answer from anyone about, what exactly the plan is going forward. If, this is definitely permanent, if they, envision, changes or some modifications. But, certainly we can communicate with leadership to let them know that, we think this is a really important aspect of facilitating public participation. And, making sure that they know that the league is a huge advocate for this being, permanent and improved on where it should be.
Yeah, that's great. And one hybrid I'd heard is that they would set a, how far away from the capital you live type boundaries for being able to do remote testimony. And I think really everyone should be allowed to do it because, going to the Capitol and testifying is really hard for people with a real job and childcare and the whole bit. So I don't think it really should matter how close to the Capitol you live. So it'd be good to get that message across too.
Henry, are
So
there,
I'm sorry, Karen, but here is an example of protecting your organization and the infrastructure of your organization and doing a benefit for everybody. That, doing the online testimony is really much more convenient and makes it possible for some people to testify that couldn't otherwise, that even if they live 2 blocks from the Capitol, wouldn't be able to testify. So it's something that really we need to be engaged in to protect what we think is important.
are there other organizations that we, excuse me, might be able to partner with that feel similarly so that it just increases the weight of our voice in saying that online testimony ought to continue after the pandemic, that this shouldn't be, it should be continuing.
Well, Colorado Nonprofit Association should be interested in this. And since I sit on their public policy committee, if something's happening around this, I certainly can bring it up.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And also, from the housing point of view, pretty much all the tenants advocacy organizations like 9 to 5 Colorado and Together Colorado and the Law and Policy Center, the Poverty Law Project, all those would be on board with this.
Yeah, cross disability. Yeah.
Absolutely. I was thinking maybe some sort of communication to our partner organizations in kind of a broad way. I think it's a pretty safe bet that all of these organizations are in favor of this. And my guess is that, probably in the past, since it was implemented in 2020, that, others have probably reached out to speak in favor of it, as have we. But I think it's definitely something that we continue to emphasize because, as we do eventually get out of the pandemic, we don't want that to be seen as a reason for this to go away. This was a great improvement in public participation opportunities that really needs to just be permanent.
Kathy Wilson.
Tony, you were talking about really getting to know the legislators in your area. And, I can see the local newspapers might be a good resource. Do you have any other suggestions on what kind of resources we might tap into for that?
Well, certainly if they have news letter, and most of them are sending out a newsletter electronically. Yes, but you could also go to the hearing or the public events that they're going to. They often have their town halls that you can participate in. And if you meet them at the grocery store.
I would say following them on social media too.
Yeah.
It's an easy way to stay in tune with their events. But also, some of them will just post things that are, happening in their community or things that are important to them. So it just kind of gives you a sense of, where their thinking is. And there's also potential for communication through that channel too, if it's appropriate.
Thanks, great.
Margie Gray.
This has all been very interesting. I hear once in a while about legislation, the legislators are working on something before the session starts, or different groups. Is there a way that we can learn what that is so we can get a head start, or do we have to wait till they get introduced before we know what they're talking about? I know the press does some things, but there must be more out there.
Well, I would say that depends to a degree. First of all, if you know the legislator very well, because you've done a drop file and you've invited them to your organization, you might just chat with them and say, I hear that you are doing XYZ. And ask them if you can be part of the conversation. And often they have some people that they work with on a piece of legislation, particularly if they know the group is interested in what's happening. The other thing is that they have to have they're limited to 5 bills, which never holds, but supposedly they're limited to 5 bills. And their first 3 bills, is that right, Andrea? The first 3 bills are due the early December.
December 1 this year.
Okay, so you can ask them what they've proposed and what they're going to bring up with the other 2 bills, and see if there's anything there that might be of interest to you. There are some legislators are happy to share the written versions that they have going. But some other ones hold them close to their chest, and so they won't let you see it, but they still often will let you know the concept and what they want to achieve by it. Andrew, what else?
The other main thing that I think I would add is participation in, coalition groups around a particular issue. So, looking to our partner organizations or thinking about, the specific topic that you're interested in. Kathy Smith, I know you are very active in, housing stakeholder groups, and a lot of discussion about the forthcoming legislation that's anticipated in the housing realm. Is discussed during the interim, during some of those meetings. Please feel free to jump in if you have specific thoughts on that, but I just wanted to use that as an example because participation in those issue-specific groups can be a great way to not only know what the topics for potential legislation might be for the upcoming session, but also can provide an opportunity to actually weigh in on that and shape it sort of on the front end as opposed to being, completely in the reactionary mode.
Mm-hmm. May I jump in for a quick second and just say that LWVCO, places high priority on partnerships and has money budgeted to join groups and coalitions, as well as to support their fundraising efforts. So if there are groups that we are not formal members of that require a fee, let me know. If you feel it's really important that we be a dues paying member of a group, let us know. We want to hear about it. Are we done with that subject? Are we on to the next question? Okay, Ann Underwood.
This is on the same question, actually, but it's related. Can you suggest or give tips on how to deal with if you already know a legislator, they're a close friend, they may be a family member? How would you handle that kind of thing and still stay neutral and be able to deal with that?
I guess I think what I would say here, and Tony, I see you chuckling, so I'll say my piece and hand it over to you. I think it's just one of those things that you have to sort of adjust style on kind of a case-by-case basis and, sort of assess what feels right, given the particular circumstances. I know it can be, sort of an awkward thing when you've got this really established personal relationship and, you're trying to be respectful kind of the business relationship. The main thing that comes to mind for me, I think, is, just being really clear about roles and indicating on the front end that, if you're contacting them, I think it's perfectly, appropriate and just realistic to think that, you're going to take a friendly personal tone with somebody that you know well, but then maybe follow that up with, I want to speak to you about something in my capacity as a league member, and, kind of just categorize it that way. I think just being clear about the role and, why it is that you kind of want to talk about it in more of a formal organizational related stance than as a personal issue can sort of help, help you navigate that situation a little bit. And Tony, I'm thinking maybe you have.
No, I pretty much agree. I mean, they are legislators that you deal with in a business manner. They have their world for legislation, and we have something we want. So you can treat it as though you were doing it with somebody else. Now, it's just going to be easier probably for you to talk to this person because they're friends. And you still need to be careful about the rules for lobbying. But generally speaking, I think that's what I would do.
Thank you.
Was that a good enough answer?
Thank you.
Kathy Wilson.
We're lucky in Larimer here that we have a really active local league who are interested in giving testimony or, contacting our legislators. What kind of guidelines are there for just regular members who are not part of the LAC, who have not registered with the General Assembly as a lobbyist, for them to say they're with the league, but be careful that they're not, testifying for the league?
We generally suggest that this has changed a bit, Kathy,
Okay.
over time, because we want to stand out more than we used to and not be quite so behind the scenes. So we are saying that it's okay to say that you're with the league, but you're not speaking for the league. Is that enough of an answer? Or?
It is, and I'm going to be our local legislative action team here in Larimer is going to be doing a training in the middle of January. So I want to make sure that as I talk with our different team leaders, that I give them good advice about how to treat this. And so that was really helpful. Thanks.
One thing that I might add, Kathy, is that, where it makes sense, I think coordination with the LAC can be really handy. It may not be appropriate in every circumstance. So again, I think this is one that, it's maybe kind of a case-by-case situation, but I think coordination with either with Tony and I or the issue-specific lobbyist that is relevant to the area that you want to testify on, or that other Larimer members might want to testify on. it can just be nice to coordinate that. And I am sort of envisioning a situation where, you know, the LAC member might speak to something more broadly and talk about the state league position and why we feel that, you know, this is an important thing to do. But it's always fantastic to bring in regional perspectives and local perspectives. So if that can be worked into, you know, sort of a joint testimony or, you know, maybe kind of a, you know, combined testimony in some sense, I think that can be really powerful if it makes sense in the particular situation.
Great, great, thanks.
Yeah, and let me clarify something too. If it is a statewide issue, if it's going to affect more than Larimer, for example, it needs to come to the LAC so that we find out how it's going to affect other leagues in the state, if there's going to be a problem or not. And then also you're building a coalition of league members across the state. And if the LAC supports it, then you've got more power behind you. So that's just another side issue, side point.
Yeah, I try to push speaking with one voice, and I think all of this fits into it. Great, thanks.
Sure, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, oh, Maude?
Sorry, I was scrolling through to see what I'd put in chat. And are amendments, if amendments are added on the floor, is it in the second reading or the third reading, or can it be in either one?
Mostly the second reading. You can add them on the third reading. Legislators generally don't like that. They think everything should be cleared up on the second reading, but there's no prohibition against adding them on both.
They are supposed to be more technical in nature where the third reading amendments are concerned, but in reality, I think it's another one of those things like with the bill deadlines and the bill number limit. You know, I think that there are exceptions and things don't always play out, you know, strictly according to that concept or that rule.
Any other, oh, go ahead, Bond.
The fiscal notes, I was looking, I know we're going to get to ballot issues next time, but I was looking at the fiscal note for a sales tax rate reduction, and the fiscal summary said, here's how it would affect the state, but will there be something on how it affects local governments? Because on sales tax, for example, that's the big hit.
Usually, doesn't it usually have something for local government in the fiscal notes?
I was trying to think what I have seen on the past. I feel like most of the focus is state, but
right.
I mean, you will sometimes see references, but I don't know that it's, you know, in-depth analysis about what the local impact would be.
I've seen such statements about local. I've seen that.
Yes, I have too. You know, they don't go into specifics on how it would be affecting the locals, but it will make reference to how it will affect the locals.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks,
okay, great.
I think that was it.
Mon, I noticed that you do have a comment about whether we've advocated for the video of the committee hearings as opposed to just the audio. I don't believe in our communication last year when we were urging continuation of expanded testimony that we made a specific point about video streaming of the committee hearings. I think our focus was more on let's make sure that we don't lose this expanded opportunity here. But I think as we, you know, as we send out some introductory communication and as we think about, you know, making this point again to leadership, that's certainly something that we can mention. I think that there's reasons for people to do that. I think it facilitates understanding and participation, but I'm assuming that there's also probably disability considerations too that might be helped by having a visual in addition to the audio.
Yeah, Nevada and Oregon both do video, and Nevada's been doing it forever, and Nevada's not a rich state. And I see Anne's hand is up.
Yeah, I signed up to present video testimony on the transportation bill last year, and I had to sign up for WebEx in order to participate. And I could see the hearing room, but then I was also in the queue for the WebEx. Turned out that I didn't end up giving testimony because it was the day that the Chauvin verdict came down, and the hearing was delayed like 2 hours. And so I sort of fell off the bottom of the queue. But it was a little tricky getting set up in advance to be able to do that. So I just ended up sending my testimony in.
And you actually raise a good point that I had considered mentioning, but I am not 100% sure if how this is going to play out exactly. As I was looking through the remote testimony sign up webpage, I noticed there's reference on it this year that says provide live testimony, and then it says via Zoom. And so it gave me the impression that there may have been a change there. And I was initially going to warn everyone that, WebEx was the platform that they have been using over the past 2 years. You need to make sure that that's downloaded before you go in to do it. But it appears to me that they may have switched that to Zoom. So, once we actually have a live session where we can go in and, kind of actually sign up for something, we should be able to figure out exactly how that's working, and we can talk about that and make sure everybody's aware.
That would be helpful, I think, because more people have Zoom, and I assumed it was for security, that Zoom has in the app at some point has not had the good security that some of the other platforms do. Yeah.
Well, I think.
Oh, sorry, Tony, go ahead.
No, I think originally it was security that they were using WebEx, but.
Maud, go ahead.
Speaking of falling off the end of a queue to testify, how effective is it to send written testimony, and should we send it to all the individual committee members?
Yes. It's effective, and yes, you should.
You'll definitely hear legislators mention in committee hearings, from time to time reference the phone calls and letters and emails that they've gotten on a particular issue. So it's something that registers, and, we want to be part of the public record. And I think, as Tony mentioned, it's good to get that communication out to all of the committee.
Any other questions? Okay, before we wrap up, I hope you will all join me in a round of applause for our fabulous presenters here. Thank you, Tony and Andrea. Really, really appreciate it. There will be follow-up. Again, session 2, we will be in touch regarding that date. I hope as you talk to your fellow league members, you will encourage them to take part in the LAC either as a full-fledged member or just by kind of popping into the meetings, so that we would love to see representation from each of our local leagues to really be getting the impact of the geographic diversity that is one of the many beauties of the league network. So we're really looking to encourage especially non-metro league members to join, going back to the access that remote testimony is allowing. So please encourage others to join and take part. Also, we are looking at some software that will allow us to better evaluate our action alerts. we'll be in touch about that. Right now, we can tell who opened our action alerts, but we can't tell who actually took action. And this will allow us to do that, to say, okay, this many people emailed Senator Bennett, this many people called Senator Bennett using our links, and as well as some kind of beefed up other processes, quick ways to send a letter to the editor and things like that. So we will be in touch about that. Let's see, expect a follow-up email from us on Monday with the recording link for this meeting, the chat, the slides, a repeat of the pathway to the LAC toolkit, the partnerships list, and the storytelling info from LWVUS that will go to all participants and all of last year's LAC members. So let's see, coming up, events coming up. Let's see, we have, well, obviously Thanksgiving. I hope you all have a lovely, lovely and safe holiday. On the 1st, we have a great program around from the Climate Emergency Task Force. Does anybody want to talk about that? Anne, great.
Well, Anne can join me.
I'm just going to say we're working hard on getting, we've got 2 speakers for sure, and we've got leads on at least a couple more speakers. So I think it's going to be a good discussion.
And I'll add, Anne, too, it's also the unveiling of our website, which outlines what the Climate Emergency Task Force does in all its groups. And if you're interested in a group, who to contact to join us.
Excellent. Please be in touch about that as you roll that out, Cindy, so that we can have links on our website too, to that directly.
Beth?
Yes.
I am referring to the Colorado website.
Great.
It's on there now. It's
Okay,
on
yep.
there now. I'm sorry. Yeah, the way I worded it. It's on there now. We're unveiling it, I guess, to the
Great.
broader
Excellent.
population. Yeah.
Okay. Other than that, we're just, gearing up for the session coming up, as I know you are. Please be in touch. We appreciate all of your energy and motivation and work in making Colorado the best state in the nation. So, Maud.
One last question. How often is our Colorado revised statutes updated? Is it annual or is it an every other year thing? If we are looking up a statute, do we need to go back and see if a bill just passed? It is annual. Okay.
Yeah, but they don't, it's not immediately after the session. So you still have to think about if it has been updated yet or not.
Okay. Is there a note somewhere as to whether it's been updated?
No, I've never seen one. I don't know.
Okay.
What I do know is, I think in the next legislative session, they sort of put the stamp of approval on the whole thing. But Andrea, have you ever seen anything?
I haven't seen anything like that. The other thing I'm thinking that might be a resource too, if you wanted to check out the session laws that, are the final recap of everything that was passed during the previous session. And it's the areas of, the statutes that it will impact. That can be another resource that might be available and helpful to you to kind of know where those changes are.
Okay, any last comments before we wrap up? Okay. Again, everyone have a lovely Thanksgiving. I know you all join me in wishing Tony a safe and wonderful trip to Antarctica. Can't wait to hear the stories and see the pictures. And thanks again, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.